There are moments in history that change the course of entire lives, small gestures that echo through time. This is a story that took place on the vast plains of Texas in 1872 when the Wild West was still wild and unpredictable. A story about an ordinary man, a courageous decision, and a gratitude that crossed completely different worlds. It was a sweltering August afternoon. The Texas sun burned mercilessly, turning the red earth into fine powder that stuck to the skin and eyes. A coachman drove his Concord carriage along the dusty trail that connected Fort Worth to Dallas, a dangerous route few took alone. His carriage was sturdy, painted red faded by the merciless sun, drawn by 4 brown horses that snorted in the intense heat. The man wore a brown Stetson hat, worn with age and dust, a linen shirt that had once been white, but now bore the marks of countless travels, and leather boots that reached up to his knees. On his belt, a Colt .45 Peacemaker hung from its holster, not because he wanted to use it, but because in that land, going unarmed was almost an invitation to tragedy. He chewed tobacco, occasionally spitting to the side, keeping his eyes peeled on the trail ahead. The life of a coachman was not easy in those times. He carried mail, small packages, sometimes passengers when they showed up. I earned little, but it was honest work. He knew every rock on that route, every dangerous curve, every place where bandits used to ambush lone travelers. But that afternoon, he wasn't prepared for what he would see. At the edge of the trail, half hidden behind a withered mesquite bush, stood a figure, a woman. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with colorful beads and fringes that swayed in the warm wind. His long black hair was partially loose, some strands stuck to his face from sweat. His bare feet were bleeding lightly, signs that he had run too far, too long. She was Kiowa. It was obvious from the tribal markings, the style of her dress, the way her dark, frightened eyes scanned the horizon. And at that time, in Texas in 1872, seeing a Kiowa woman alone in that region meant trouble. Big problems. The wars between the settlers and the Plains tribes were still fresh in everyone's memory. The American Army maintained forts spread across the territory precisely to control conflicts. The Kiowa, along with the Comanche and Apache, fought desperately to protect their ancestral lands against the relentless expansion of white settlers. Blood had been spilled on both sides. Distrust and hatred poisoned any possibility of peace. The coachman pulled on the reins, bringing the horses to a stop with a neigh of protest. He knew the risks. If anyone saw him helping a Kiowa, they could be accused of treason, of collaborating with the enemy. He could lose his job, his reputation, maybe even his life. The vigilantes were not known for asking questions before acting. But when his eyes met hers, he saw something that transcended politics and war. He saw pure terror. He saw a desperate person. And in that moment, under the scorching Texas sun, he made a decision that would change everything. He climbed out of the carriage, his boots kicking up a cloud of red dust. He took off his hat briefly, a gesture of respect, and made a universal sign with his hand pointing to the carriage. She hesitated. His eyes darted to the revolver on his belt, then to his face, trying to read his intentions. Finally, with the quick movements of someone afraid that the offer would disappear, she ran and climbed into the carriage, hiding among the bags of mail and boxes stacked in the back. The coachman returned to the driver's seat, picked up the worn leather reins, and whipped the horses. The carriage rocked violently over the rocks and holes in the trail, gaining speed. Each bump made the wooden wheels groan, the leather suspension creak. He knew he needed to get away from that area quickly before whoever was chasing the woman showed up. For hours they traveled like this. The sun began to descend, painting the sky blood red and intense orange, the characteristic colors of a Texas sunset. Shadows lengthened across the rolling plains, turning each sage bush into an eerie silhouette. Coyotes began to howl in the distance, their calls echoing across the empty expanse. The woman remained hidden, silent, only her eyes occasionally peeking between the boxes to check if they were being followed. The coachman kept the horses at a steady pace, not too fast so as not to tire them too much, but fast enough to put distance between them and any danger. When the darkness finally fell completely, turning the world into silvery shadows under the crescent moon, it finally stopped. They were far from the main trail now, in a secluded area next to a small stream that still had running water despite the drought. He knew that there she would have a chance to find her way back to her people. He climbed down again, his movements careful and slow so as not to startle her. He pointed north, where he knew the Kiowa maintained mobile camps on the northernmost plains of Texas, near Indian Territory. He made gestures with his hands, trying to convey, "Follow the stream, go north, you will find your people." She got out of the carriage, her bare feet touching the earth, still hot from the day. For a long moment they stood there, two strangers from worlds that were at war, united by a brief moment of shared humanity. Then she did something he would never forget. She placed her right hand over her heart, held it there for a moment, then extended her open palm toward it. A Kiowa gesture of deep gratitude, of recognition of a debt that could not be repaid with words. He nodded, put his hat back on his head, and simply said, "Go." Go quickly. Aja. Even though she didn't understand the English words, the tone was universal. And then she disappeared into the darkness of the Texan night, her figure melting into the shadows until he could no longer see her. The coachman stood there for a few minutes, looking in the direction she had gone, then returned to his carriage. He slept right there, wrapped in a woolen blanket under the endless stars, the sound of the brook murmuring softly, the horses grazing peacefully near him. In the following days, life resumed its normal rhythm. He continued to make his routes, transporting mail and packages between the small towns that were sprouting up like mushrooms across Texas. Fort Worth was growing rapidly, transforming from a simple military outpost into a full-fledged city. Cowboys arrived from the cattle trails, spending their money in noisy saloons. Merchants opened stores. Civilization, as the white people like to call it, was coming. But that woman remained in his thoughts. Did she make it safely? Have you found your people? Or would he have been lost in the merciless plains, a victim of heat, thirst, or the many dangers that lurked in that land? He would never know, or so I thought. 3 nights after that meeting, something extraordinary happened. The coachman had finished his route for the day and was in his little log cabin on the outskirts of Fort Worth. It was a simple structure, made of roughly sawn boards, with a tin roof that made an infernal noise when it rained. Inside, only the essentials. An iron cot with a straw mattress, a rough wooden table, a cast-iron stove in the corner, and shelves where he kept his few possessions. He was cleaning his revolver by the light of an oil lamp, a necessary task after days on the dusty road, when he heard something that made his blood run cold. The unmistakable sound of many horses approaching. Not the casual trot of travelers, but the rhythmic, coordinated gallop of a large group moving with purpose. He got up quickly, picked up the still disassembled revolver, and ran to the small window. What he saw through the opening made his heart almost stop. Dozens of Kiowa warriors on their painted horses approached his cabin. The light of the full moon illuminated their faces, painted with war paint, their spears raised against the night sky, their bows slung over their shoulders. Terror gripped him. His hands shook as he hurriedly tried to reassemble the revolver, dropping pieces onto the wooden floor. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. They came for me, he thought, panic rising in his throat. They thought I hurt her. They thought I captured her. They came to get revenge. He knew the stories. He knew what happened when the Kiowa came in numbers like that. He knew he had no chance of fighting or fleeing. He was surrounded, alone, completely at their mercy. Breathing hard, he dropped the revolver parts. It wouldn't do any good anyway. If he were to die, he would die like a man, standing up, not hiding like a coward. He opened the wooden door, which creaked on its rusty hinges, and stepped out onto the small plot of land in front of the cabin. The riders formed a semicircle around him, their horses snorting, their silhouettes imposing against the starry sky. He could see the details now, the eagle feathers in their hair, the buffalo hide shields decorated with sacred symbols, the spears with sharp metal tips that gleamed under the moon. Some wore leather vests over their bare chests, others had buffalo blankets over their shoulders despite the heat. Your face. They were serious, determined, unfathomable. And then, something completely changed. Among the warriors, a horse stepped forward, and there she was, the woman he had helped. But now she was transformed, no longer the terrified fugitive in rags. She wore a Kiowa ceremonial dress, beautifully decorated with beads and intricate patterns, long fringes that swayed gracefully. Her hair was braided with colorful ribbons. She rode with the confidence of someone born on the back of horses. She got off her spotted horse with fluid movements and walked towards him. Behind her, the warriors began to descend as well, but not with weapons drawn. They carried other things. Thick, soft buffalo hides, the work of months of preparation. Bison dried meat carefully packed in leather. Blankets woven with complex geometric patterns in traditional Kiowa colors, red, yellow, blue, and white. Handmade moccasins with soft leather and buffalo soles decorated with beads. A war bow finely crafted from sinew and wood from bois d'arc, the strongest wood on the plains. The coachman finally understood. They didn't come to seek revenge. They didn't come to accuse him. They didn't come to fight. They came to thank you. One by one, the warriors approached. They placed the gifts at his feet with reverence. Some touched his shoulder with the palm of their hand, a Kiowa gesture of respect between equals. Others made the sign with their hand over their heart, then extending it towards them. An older warrior, with graying hair and a face marked by countless battles and summers in the sun, gripped her forearm tightly, looked deeply into her eyes, and nodded. It was recognition among honorable men. The woman approached last. She held his hands in hers, hands that were now clean and cared for, no longer scratched and bloody. She spoke in Kiowa, her melodious voice carrying emotion that transcended the language barrier. Although he didn't understand the specific words, the meaning was crystal clear. Thank you for seeing me as a person. Thank you for risking everything. Thank you for returning me to my family, my people, my life. Tears began to run down the coachman's weathered face, making trails through the dust accumulated on his skin. His hands were shaking, but no longer from fear. They trembled with emotion, with something so profound and unexpected that he could barely process it. He had done something simple that hot day on the trail. I had just helped someone in need, but now he saw that that gesture had reverberated in ways he never imagined. One of the warriors approached, carrying something special. It was a partial headdress, with just a few eagle feathers, not a full chief's headdress, but something significant nonetheless. Among the Kiowa, eagle feathers were sacred, each representing an act of courage or honor. He placed the headdress carefully into the coachman's hands. This was more than a gift. It was recognition that, even though they were from different peoples, this white man had demonstrated the kind of courage and honor that the Kiowa valued above all else. The warriors began to mount their horses again. The moon continued to shine over everyone, indifferent to human borders and the conflicts that divided that land. The mission was accomplished. Gratitude had been expressed in the most meaningful way they knew. But before they left, the woman looked at him one last time. His eyes shone with tears, too, and she smiled, a smile that carried all the weight of life returned, of family reunited, of hope restored. A smile that said, "You changed my story, and I will carry that with me forever." Then they rode back into the Texan night, their horses' hooves kicking up silver dust under the moon. The sound gradually faded, moving away toward the northern plains, until it became nothing more than a whisper on the hot wind, and finally total silence. The coachman stood there for a long time, surrounded by those gifts that represented something much greater than material objects. They represented honor, gratitude, respect. They represented a bridge between two worlds that were at war, built on the simplest and most powerful foundation there is, human compassion. He slowly entered the cabin, carrying the gifts one by one. The buffalo skins he spread over his cot, replacing the thin blankets he had. He hung the blankets on the wall, their geometric patterns bringing color and life to that simple space. The moccasins he tried on, they fit perfectly, as if they had been made specifically for him. The arch he placed above the fireplace, a symbol of respect and honor. And the headdress with the eagle feathers he kept carefully in a box, something too precious to be exposed to dust and time. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the cot, wrapped in the soft, warm buffalo fur, looking out the window at the endless stars of Texas. And he understood something fundamental about the nature of life, of honor, of human connection. In that brutal world of the Old West, where violence was common and distrust between different peoples was the norm, he had witnessed something rare and precious. I had seen that, in the end, beneath all the differences in language, culture, skin color, there was something fundamental that united us. The ability to recognize suffering in others, the ability to reach out even when it's risky, the capacity for gratitude that transcends all barriers. He thought of all the stories he heard in the saloons of Fort Worth, stories of hatred, of revenge, of atrocities committed on both sides, and now he had his own story to tell, a different story, a story of how a small act of compassion had created a connection that defied all logic in that violent time. In the days, weeks, and months that followed, that night stayed with him. He continued his life as a coachman, driving his carriage along the dusty trails of Texas. But now, whenever he saw someone in need of help, no matter who they were, where they came from, he stopped. Because I had learned that kindness is never wasted. The compassion always finds its way back, that when you help a person, you don't just help them, but you touch all the lives connected to that life. Sometimes, on clear nights, he looked north to where he knew the Kiowa still maintained their mobile camps on the vast plains, holding out as best they could against the inevitable tide of expansion. And he wondered about her. Was he okay? Did he have a family? Children, perhaps? Did he tell the story of that day to his grandchildren the same way he would tell his own if he had them? He never saw her again. The Wild West was changing rapidly. Within a few years, the Plains tribes would be forced onto reservations. The buffalo would be hunted almost to extinction. Railroads would cut old cattle trails. The world he knew would disappear, transformed into something new and different. But that night, that moment of connection between two worlds would remain forever. Not just in his memory, but in the stories that would be told, in the way that encounter changed his perspective on what it meant to be human in a time of conflict. In the understanding that, even in the most difficult circumstances, the choice to see another person as a person, to reach out, to choose compassion over indifference, is always worth it. Years later, when Fort Worth became a real city, with paved streets and gas lamps, with trains coming and going, with elegant stores and three-story hotels, he still kept those gifts. The buffalo skins, already worn from time and use, still warmed his cot. The quilts still hung on its walls, their colors faded, but their patterns still distinct. The arch still stood over his fireplace, and the headdress with the eagle feathers he kept in his box, occasionally opening it just to remember. And when people asked about those unusual objects in a simple coachman's house, he told the story, not with pride or to brag, but with reverence. It told about a hot afternoon in August 1872, about a terrified woman on a dusty trail, about a choice he made in a moment, and about 3 nights later when he discovered that kindness has a way of returning that goes beyond any material reward. This is the story that took place in the heart of the Texas Wild West. A story about a nameless coachman who did something extraordinary by simply being decent. A story about a Kiowa woman who never forgot the one who saved her. A story about gratitude that crossed war, hatred, all the barriers that humans build between themselves. And in the end, it's a story about us, about the choices we make when no one is looking, about the kind of person we choose to be when it would be easier, safer to look the other way, about the simple and powerful truth that no matter how divided we may be on the surface, there is something fundamental that connects us. And when we honor that connection, when we choose to see humanity where others see only differences, we create moments that resonate through time. The Old West was a harsh, violent, unforgiving place. But even there, in the midst of all that hardness, kindness found its way. Compassion created connections. And an ordinary man, in a faded red carriage pulled by 4 brown horses on a dusty Texas trail, proved that sometimes the simplest gestures create the most extraordinary stories. If this story touched your heart, I gave X that she changes her actions. Because every day, in our own version of the Wild West, we face similar choices. Someone needs help. Someone needs compassion. Someone needs someone to stop the carriage and extend a hand. Be that coachman. Be that gratitude. Be proof that humanity, even in difficult times, even when it's risky, even when it would be easier to just pass by, is still worth it. Because in the end, these are the stories that matter. Not those of hate and division, but those of connection and compassion. And each time you choose kindness, you become part of that eternal story. A story that began on a dusty Texas trail in 1872, and that continues whenever someone chooses to see a person where others see only a stranger.